You're driving the same way you've driven for years. Same habits, same instincts. You check your mirrors, follow the speed limit, and trust that what you learned once still applies today. But what if one of those rules quietly changed in 2025 and nothing around you made it obvious? No warning, no announcement in your daily routine. Just a subtle legal shift that could affect how your actions are judged the next time you're on the road. For many drivers, that moment doesn't come as a warning. It comes as a citation. So here's the question. Should drivers be held fully responsible for changes in traffic law they were never clearly informed about? Or should there be a stronger system to make sure everyone actually knows the rules? Tell me your answer in the comments. Now let's walk through this carefully, because when people hear that a traffic law changed in 2025, it often sounds like a single nationwide rule. In reality, the legal structure is more complex. In my legal analysis, traffic law in the United States operates primarily at the state level. Each state has its own vehicle code, its own enforcement standards, and its own penalty system. However, federal influence still exists through funding incentives, safety recommendations, and regulatory frameworks that encourage states to adopt certain policies. This creates a pattern where multiple states update similar laws around the same time, giving the impression of a nationwide change. Historically, traffic laws have always evolved alongside technology and public safety concerns. In the early 20th century, the focus was basic: speed limits, right-of-way, and driver licensing. As vehicles became faster and roads more crowded, lawmakers introduced stricter and more detailed rules. Over time, enforcement also evolved, moving from simple roadside policing to a combination of officer discretion, administrative systems, and increasingly digital monitoring tools. By 2025, many updates across different states have centered around areas like distracted driving definitions, electronic device usage, updated signaling requirements, and changes in enforcement thresholds. These changes are often subtle. They don't necessarily introduce entirely new concepts, but they refine what counts as a violation. Courts would likely examine whether these refinements are clearly defined and reasonably related to safety. That's where constitutional considerations begin to matter. The Fourth Amendment plays a central role in traffic enforcement. Any traffic stop must be based on reasonable suspicion that a law has been violated. When laws change, the definition of what counts as a violation may shift, and officers must align their actions with those updated standards. If a stop is challenged, courts would likely review whether the officer's interpretation of the law was reasonable under the circumstances. The Fifth Amendment also has relevance, particularly in how information is gathered and used during and after a stop. While routine traffic interactions are generally administrative, certain situations can escalate, and at that point, constitutional protections regarding statements and evidence may become more significant. In my legal analysis, the key issue is not just what the law says, but how clearly it communicates expectations to the public. A law can be legally valid even if awareness is limited, but that creates a gap between legal authority and everyday understanding. Now consider the real-world impact. A driver who learned the rules years ago may unknowingly operate under outdated assumptions. Something as simple as how you interact with your phone, how you merge lanes, or how long you remain in a certain position on the road can now be interpreted differently under updated laws. Supporters of these changes argue that they are necessary. Roads today are more complex, vehicles are more advanced, and distractions are more prevalent. From that perspective, refining laws is essential to maintaining safety and reducing accidents. Critics, however, point out that many of these updates are not communicated effectively. They argue that if compliance depends on awareness, then awareness should be treated as part of the legal system, not an afterthought. Courts would likely focus on whether the law itself is clear and consistently applied, rather than how widely it is known. That places responsibility on drivers, even when information is not easily accessible. Now let's talk about practical consequences. For most drivers, the first sign of a legal change is enforcement. A citation, a warning, or an administrative notice becomes the moment of awareness. Financial penalties are usually the immediate impact, but they can extend further. Increased insurance premiums, points on a license, and in some cases, additional legal obligations can follow. In my legal analysis, the long-term effect of even minor violations is often underestimated. One incident may not seem significant, but repeated issues or higher-level violations can create a pattern that affects a driver's legal standing over time. There's also a broader policy reality to consider. Lawmakers are constantly balancing two goals: improving safety and maintaining fairness. If laws are too vague, they become difficult to enforce. If they are too detailed, they become difficult to follow. The challenge is finding a middle ground where rules are clear enough to guide behavior, but flexible enough to address real-world situations. Courts would likely continue to play a role in maintaining that balance, especially when disputes arise over how a law is interpreted or applied. Looking ahead, the trend is clear. Traffic laws will continue to evolve. Technology will play a larger role in enforcement. Data systems will become more integrated, and with that, expectations for compliance will increase. In my legal analysis, this means that drivers must become more proactive. Not because the system is unfair, but because it is becoming more precise. Small actions are more likely to be noticed, recorded, and evaluated under updated standards. And that brings us to the most important point of all. Driving is not just a routine activity. It's a regulated legal space where rules are constantly being refined. Understanding those rules is no longer something you can rely on memory for. It requires ongoing awareness. So here's one final question to think about. As laws continue to evolve, do you believe the responsibility should fall more on drivers to stay updated, or on the system to ensure those updates are clearly communicated to everyone? Share your thoughts in the comments. A respectful, thoughtful discussion helps bring clarity to laws that affect millions of people every single day. And if you want clear, fact-based explanations of legal changes that directly impact your life, consider subscribing for more in-depth breakdowns like this. Because at the end of the day, knowing the law isn't just about avoiding penalties, it's about driving with confidence, awareness, and a clear understanding of the rules that shape every mile ahead.